a snapshot of current conditions in the city, summarizes community residential input, prioritizes improvements, and creates an achievable plan to guide the city's growth over the next 10 years. This document creates a vision for the city's future, helps to translate that to reality, and it's an important first step in securing grant funding for other things such as community development improvements, streets, infrastructure, other grants of those types. So it is important to note that a comprehensive plan is intended to be a living document, meaning that it should be flexible to accommodate change over the next 10 years. Anything can happen with the city. Growth can be wildly outpaced, it can fall behind. And so with that in mind, GrantWorks will provide the editable documents so that this document can be updated as time goes on. So at GrantWorks, our plans are built on a foundation of community input, which would be community meetings or online surveys, current conditions, which is where GrantWorks will come to the city. We will drive every street in the city and we will map the location and condition of every house, water infrastructure, drainage, well, not drainage infrastructure for this plan, gas line infrastructure, land use. We'll map the entire CBD, etc. The plan is also founded on a foundation of growth based on historic trends and projections, as well as best practices from our decades of experience with planning in particularly rural Texas towns. So each chapter in the plan begins with context, which is a summary of previous studies and that community input that I mentioned. Inventory and forecast, which would be research, data analysis that we do, as well as findings from our field work, which is that inventory that I mentioned earlier. Key considerations in order to address potential problems or challenges the city might be facing. An implementation table, which is a guideline of achievable goals and potential funding sources, and supporting appendices found at the end of each chapter and in a separate digital appendix that will be provided to the city. Most chapters in the plan will have accompanying maps of either existing or future conditions, or both in some cases. As I mentioned, all files will be editable and delivered to the city both in hard copy and in digital format. Briefly, this is just an example of what our implementation tables look like in the comprehensive plan. This is a generic example, but as you can see, there is a goal set for the city and then action items in order to achieve that goal. Each action item is given a rough timeline, as well as a lead organization, a cost estimate, and a potential funding source. Our infrastructure chapters are structured a little bit differently than the rest of the plan, as they're drafted by an engineer and not by myself. They will each come with an implementation table as well as improvement maps, which you can see an example here of a water system improvement map. Many cities find these incredibly helpful. For example, this is a proposed water map. Each color on the map indicates a particular phase. Engineering improvements are always broken into 3 to 4 phases of approximate cost based on priority. And it's important to note that the costs for these phases are estimates from our engineer. It's not a construction document. This is input information gathering so that the city has a document listing all of the concerns that would be addressed with further studies. The Pearsall Comprehensive Plan will have 14 chapters. 11 of those correspond to key areas of interest such as housing, wastewater, the central business district, etc. The plan will also include a chapter entirely devoted to potential funding sources, as well as a subdivision ordinance and a zoning ordinance. And the zoning ordinance will come with an updated zoning map as well. It's important to note that Chapter 10, the Recreation and Open Space chapter, will also function as a standalone Parks Master Plan and will be up to the standards that Texas Parks and Wildlife sets out in order to meet their grant applications.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
How was it determined?
The 14 chapters were determined when the city applied for the grant, which would have been 2 to 3 years ago, I believe, in the application process. The
It's a
city
little over a
selected.
year, Council. We actually, when we submitted the grant, we outlined the chapters. The only one that we changed, actually, the one that changed
I have
is,
that updated.
did you?
Mhm.
Okay, it's the storm, the drainage, because we're doing a
A gas
master
study
drainage study.
instead.
But these are all chapters that we considered as part of the comp plan. We could always add more, but they're traditionally, and correct me if I'm wrong, these are all in most comprehensive plans, at least ones I've seen. So you have all these chapters that are all critical to the needs of the city.
Will you still have, you said?
Yeah, for a cost, but you could still add if you're thinking some other, I couldn't figure out.
I just don't know how we determine that as a council.
Do you have anything in mind, Councilmember?
No, how do we determine this as a council?
I'm sorry?
How did we determine this as a council?
This was a discussion that came up as when we applied, and these were presented to the council as far as all of these chapters.
I can tell you there aren't very many other chapters that could be added. There's a drainage study which could be done, an economic development study, streets could be added, but you guys have a thoroughfare study which they sort of overlap. Yes, these would have been chosen when the city applied for the grant a year or two ago. And so next steps. GrantWorks has not started the Pearsall plan yet. The city asked me to come and present sort of a preliminary presentation of what to expect before we begin the plan. We're currently aiming to begin our work in late September. Our plans begin with the field work that I mentioned, where we drive every street in the city and we collect that community inventory and create those maps. We usually also like to hold our community meetings during this time, as we've already traveled to the city, and it's good to do those at the same time. Field work usually takes between 2 to 5 days, depending on the size of the city and our team. And at the same time, we will post an online survey for residents as well. After the field work, it takes me, our mapping team, and our engineering team usually around 3 to 5 months to create the comprehensive plan. This depends on how involved the city would like to be, as well as other variables. It can take longer, it can be shorter. The more the city would like to be involved, we love that, but it does sort of slow the process down as there is that back and forth review process. Once the plan is complete, the city is required to have a minimum of 12 days to review the plan and open it up to the public for public comment. Then I return to the city for a final hearing and a brief presentation on the completed plan. City Council signs a resolution accepting the plan as complete. This does not mean the city is adopting the plan. This means that GrantWorks has fulfilled their end of the contract and provided a document that is suitable to guide future policy decisions. From there, TDA, Texas Department of Agriculture, who is the state agency that administers the grant funds, will review the plan and release grant funds upon approval. This can take several months, and in particular has been much slower since the start of the pandemic, so I really have no timeline for how long that would take for TDA to approve the plan. And with that concludes my presentation.
What has typically been the timeline that TDA approves the plan? And that approves to fund it, is that what my understanding is?
To release grant funding to pay
Yes.
for.
Previously, it took the TDA a couple of months. It's taken them anywhere between 6 months to a year now. It's been just all over the place. But again, when we do the final hearing and sign the resolution, the city will provide the match funds for the grant, and then upon TDA's approval, they will release the grant funding for the rest of the comprehensive plan.
Okay. Council, you all have any specific questions for GrantWorks? I'm personally very excited about this. I know the council, although I'm new to this council, there's been a desire to have a comprehensive master plan, so I think this is going to provide a pretty good foundation for us to utilize going forward, and a good tool as we prepare future budgets of what needs to be done, from y'all's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So looking forward to that and appreciate that very much.
Thank you. I just want to say one more thing. With these plans, in order to create the most useful document for the city, it's important that I be aware of anything and everything up front. If new development is coming into the city, if you're planning a new subdivision or a new grocery store, or any sort of long-term goals the city has, please let me aware, please help me be aware of everything so that I can create the most useful document for the city.
Sounds good.
Okay?
All right, thank
Thank
you
you.
very much, appreciate that. Okay, moving on to our next item. This will be item 6C, and related will be 6D. These are considered an act on a resolution for the commitment of additional local funds associated with the construction contract overage for TCDBG Water and Sewer Improvement Plan. So C and D go together. I'm going to turn the floor over to Fred.
Yes. In Mayor and Council, we may allow, I think, L&B would like to get on the call. I believe they may be on the call. And also, GrantWorks is a lady by the name of Christina Wershing, that also may be on the call. It's just a phone call, and I think it's, because they're not voting on the item, I think we're okay, unless the council disagrees. But in essence, council, what this is a change order for this project. As the council knows, the city's committed to, I believe, well, you'll see it there on page 11, what the city's committed to. $249,000, which includes $45,000 of the local match. And so T Construction had a change order. Part of that change order, in a nutshell, basically is a sewer line that was already improved. I don't know how many years back that wasn't caught, I guess, in the whole scheme of things. So in essence, what they're saying is they're not going to do that portion of the project because it's been done. And so we're going to address another portion of the project, and you have it here as far as what the change is. And Hector can probably touch on this as well. But what they need to do is we need to get this approved through TDA to make this change. And in the process, the contractor needs to demobilize and then immobilize again to come back and finish the work if the council agrees to pay this additional change order. Hector, you want to touch on a couple of things as far as what the change order will be?
Yes, like you said, Peach Street was had already been improved by 800 feet, I believe, is what the linear feet was. And what they want to do is they want to move it over to Cherry Street. And there's added cost because I think it adds two manholes to the job, and an added cost for the pre-TV and post-TV after the work has been done. So that's part of the added cost for that project. But it's the same amount of linear feet. It's just got some additions as far as a manhole, a couple manholes, two manholes, and they're to redirect one of the lines at the very top of the street off of Alabama to be able to connect to Cherry Street, and then redo Cherry Street and add that second manhole. So that's part of the reason why the added cost has been included in there.
So the difference is around $12,000 initially as far as the construction, and then an additional, I think $8,000 to immobilize and demobilize. So all in all, it's a little over $20,000 will be for the change order. These would, if the council authorizes, it would come from bond proceeds. We still have some bond money, and that's what we would recommend to the council, because there's grant money still tied to whatever needs to be done. So there's grant money that we would lose if we didn't utilize all of the grant funds. And from my understanding from Ms. Wershing is TDA would not, I don't know that they frown upon it, but I don't know that they would the consideration, I guess, for future grants, they definitely take it into consideration is what I'm understanding.
So in a nutshell, we had a CDBG grant for roughly $250,000, and due to some oversight of the previous engineer and company, It's just gonna have some cost overruns, $22,000, which is certainly not pleasant. But it is replacing sewer line on Peach and Cherry Street, of which we're gonna get it done. It's just because it can't be done timely. They left and gone another job, and now they've got to come and do another one plus build.
Well, the one on Peach Street has already been improved, so that was not getting touched.
Okay.
We're moving over one block over to Cherry Street. And on the balance of the original scope of work, they're about 90% done, so that what they want to do is they want to carry on and just continue on Cherry Street and not have to leave back to Sealy or Houston, wherever they're from, and then have to come back. So that's what I was asking.
Well,
So,
if-
I have a question.
Yes,
So
Councilwoman
on
Hernandez.
the one that, on the Cherry Street that y'all are requesting to get done, was that on the scope of work before and it didn't get done? Or
No, that was not part of the
Okay.
scope, the original scope. It was always Peach Street, just Peach and Mulberry and Alabama.
I have a question.
Yes, sir, Councilman Hernandez.
So LNV told us that Peach Street was gonna get fixed,
Yes, sir.
and now they're saying, oh, no, we don't have to fix it because it's already been fixed.
Right.
How does that happen?
I have no clue. I mean, it's something belongs to us, and we knew it had been fixed. We knew that it had been improved, and we noted it. It just didn't.
This was in conversation, correct me if I'm wrong, between LNB and the contractor, is that right? We weren't involved in that
We
conversation.
were not involved in that conversation, that's correct. Not
Were
at the,
were we involved in conversation to move over to Cherry Street?
yes. I mean, that's the only one that makes sense, because from a cost-effective perspective, moving over to the other way would have cost triple the amount they're asking for. It's a longer street, it's at an angle, has more customers. That would require a third manhole, so that's an extra $7,000 added to the bill. Plus the post TV costs money too, so after they do the work, they have to hire a third party to come in and then TV it. Make sure.
So what was Peach Street gonna cost us?
56.
I don't have the breakdown with me, Mayor Pro Tem. I don't have the breakdown, but I can.
The difference is the manholes. Going the difference is the manhole and the post TV, the added post TV, because they've already come and TV'd the Peach Street.
You want to explain to them what that is?
What they do is, before they come in and do any construction, they have a third-party TV session where they come in and then camera the pipe that's gonna be bursted. You know, so what they do, they map out, it's just basically a mapping of all the services that are tied in from the laterals of the residents. And it gives them a virtual image of where everything, all the laterals are. So when they go in with the pipe burst, they'll know exactly where, down to I think it's like a 3 or 6 inch variant, plus or minus with the camera, and that's what they do. And then after the work has been completed, they come in with a post TV to make sure that there's no leaks. They do a smoke test and all that good stuff. Make sure that nothing's leaking and nothing's backflowing and proper slope has been adjusted. So.
But to answer your question, Mayor Pro Tem, there was an oversight. From years back that this work was done, it wasn't identified as part of the scope. And so now we're coming back and saying, well, we'd like to use the remaining grant funds, and at the same time, we know that there's an added cost. But in my estimation, I guess what I'm suggesting is that I would recommend that you use the remaining grant funds and pay the dollars that we don't want to pay. That's really where we're at.
I certainly-
That's on the short term, but in the long term, I'm getting kind of nervous with this kind of activity, because what else do we know or not know about that was done or not done, and we paid out? Does anybody here at City Hall have any idea?
Aside from Peach Street, that's all.
Are you referring to other?
Yes, other projects.
Other bond programs?
Other projects, other streets, other things. One of the things that I think you were in the council, Mayor, when we talked to Rick Garcia, I think that was his name, from L&D, as to who was going to be supervising these projects. He said he was. Now, to me, that's a conflict of interest, because nobody here at City Hall really went out to check. And so, you know, I'm a little leery as to even doing any more business with him, period.
Now, your reference is L&D?
Yes.
Or doing anything else with this, with any of that, project.